Hi guys, and welcome to the Stephen King Sematary Club. Chapter 27, it is the 27th of June, and Larry is sitting in Central Park. Quote, behind him, Fifth Avenue was crazily jammed with cars, all of them silent now, their owners dead or fled. Page 231. And he's near the Menagerie, which I'm not exactly sure where that is. I've been in Central Park once in my life. The only thing that we ended up seeing was the John Lennon Imagine Memorial. So I don't know if the Menagerie is still a thing or if Stephen King made it up. I have heard of the Central Park Zoo, so I'm guessing that's the same thing. Not sure. But anyway, in this menagerie, the animals have mostly died. There is a monkey that's still alive, and as Larry is sitting there thinking things, it looks weaker and weaker, and finally it dies also. Larry's mom died about 3 days ago. Quote, she hadn't known him at the end. There had been no final moment of recognition. Page 236. And it's really sad because she basically died in an overcrowded hospital with, no sense of structure, no sense of anything final happening. So she died, and there was no one to, come talk to Larry. There was no one to take his mother's body away. There was no giving of information or anything like that. Larry ended up getting some things out of her purse, and quote, he tore a deposit slip from the back of her book and wrote on it her name, her address, and after a moment's calculation, her age. He clipped it to her blouse pocket with the bobby pin and began to cry. He kissed her cheek and fled crying. He felt like a deserter. Page 237. So, poor Larry, his mom is dead. He just had to leave her in this hospital hallway without any kind of closure, I guess, and he did what he could. He pretty much pinned her information to her, and he left. So now he's sitting in the park, and he is not sure what to do, and he meets Rita Blakemore, who is an older woman, and she is also alone, and they kind of join forces. Chapter 28. Fran's parents are both dead. Her mother died in the hospital, her father died at home, and he is currently upstairs dead in his bed, and Fran is kind of trying to get her wits about her and think about burying him. Quote, the only other person in town besides herself who seemed all right was Amy Lauder's 16-year-old brother, Harold, page 246. And Harold pulls up to the house in a car, and he makes you feel uncomfortable. He seems like he's not the kind of guy you want to be stuck with in this kind of a situation. He's like the last, that typical, if you were the last guy on earth kind of guy. And, quote, but it struck Fran with a tired sort of irony that the only person left in Algonquin, besides herself, should be one of the very few people in town she honestly didn't like. Page 248. And Amy, Harold's sister, Amy was friends with Fran, so she's known him for a long time. He was like the annoying little brother that I'm sure we've all dealt with when we have friends who have little siblings, and we've known them ever since childhood. So Franny and Harold kind of talk a little bit, and then Franny kind of says, I need to bury my dad, so please go away. I need to do this on my own. So she ends up hauling her father downstairs, buries him in his garden, which he would have liked. And she goes inside exhausted because she's pregnant and she's been digging a grave and hauling her dad's body around. And, that's going to take a lot out of you. And she has a nightmare about Randall Flagg. Chapter 29. Stu is still at Stubbington, and he starts to suspect that he is a loose thread that needs to be tied up. And he doesn't like it, but he is convinced that given all the armed soldiers who come in with the medical personnel, there's no longer really a need to keep him alive. Everything is just disintegrated to the point where they're not able to make a cure. They're not able to do anything with these studies. They're just going through the motions. And as soon as just a soldier comes in the door, he is convinced that is the time when he will be killed. So there is a man who comes in to kill Stu, and at the very last minute, Stu kind of fakes him out by saying, "Oh, look over there! Oh my gosh!" And the guy turns to look, and Stu uses that opportunity to just whack him with a chair and get his gun, and they fight, and Stu ends up killing the guy who was sent to kill him. He has to navigate through this maze where there's dead people. He doesn't know what's around all of these turns. He's not sure how to get out, so he has to try and escape, and it's just a huge building full of stuff. He's afraid of what might jump out around the corner or what he might run into. It's a very scary situation. You could very much relate to it because I'm sure we've all been in administrative buildings that are very confusing. Stu is almost free. There's a fire escape. He's able to go out into a stairwell, and he can see the outside, and it's just a few feet away. Quote, Stu was still staring out, transfixed, when the hand slipped out of the darkness of the stairwell and grasped his ankle. Page 264. You're not expecting that. You're thinking, oh, he made it without any kind of running into any problem. Perfect, And so, of course, he freaks out and he starts stomping on this person who has grabbed him, who, by the way, has also spoken to him in a very creepy voice. And he finally escapes and is free. But that hand coming out and grabbing the ankle, that is just the thing of nightmares. That is something that worries me. Chapter 30, Arnett has become a ghost town. And we find out from this chapter that cats do not catch the flu, and birds also seem to be unaffected, but dogs and horses die. Chapter 31, Christopher Bradenton. He is sick and delirious. He has known Randall Flagg, but he knows him as Richard Fry. He's known him for a long time, and he has made some kind of a deal with Randall Flagg to get papers and a stolen car and put it all in his name. Bradenton is dying, and he is very sickly, and Randall Flagg says, if you help me, I will give you this cure. Of course, that's a lie, and he ends up killing Bradenton as soon as he gets the information. Chapter 32, we are at the 29th of June, and Lloyd is still in prison, and most people have not come into work. They've run away or they've died. So he is pretty much on his own. His next door neighbor, his cellmate next door, is dead, and Lloyd he's unscrewing a metal cot leg, so the thing from the bed that holds the bed up, he's unscrewed that, and he reaches into his dead cellmate's cell with this metal cot leg, and he kills a rat with it, and he fishes the rat toward him, and he grabs it and he stows it under his mattress because he is going to have to eat it if he needs to. He's already been rationing his food. He's already been drinking out of the toilet. He is preparing, doesn't want to eat a rat, but he is quite prepared to do so if he has to. Chapter 33. Nick Andros is reading in the sheriff's office, and all of a sudden the lights in the town just all go out. So now it's pitch black, nighttime, and Ray Booth, the missing bully from earlier, one of his attackers, the lead attacker, has been spying this whole time. He has been on the outskirts of town and he has been watching. And so he uses this chance to sneak into the sheriff's office and ambush Nick, who won't be able to hear him, and they get into a fight. Nick tries to shoot him. He ends up shooting his gun, and it's still in the holster, so it runs down his leg, the bullet, and it grazes his leg. And then Ray Booth, when they're actually fighting, Ray Booth jams his thumb into Nick's eye and just starts pushing and pushing, and Nick finally is able to shoot Ray and kills him. But it reminds me of the Game of Thrones with the eye and the thumbs and the eye. It just... Chapter 34, One of my least favorite characters, Donald Merwin Albert, who is the trash can man. We are in Powtonville, Indiana, and his life story is a mess. His father, Wendell Albert, killed a bartender, then he went home and killed trash cans, two older brothers, and his sister. His mother, Sally, escaped with him when he was 5 years old. He was 5 years old at this time. The sheriff killed his dad, and then the sheriff married his mom. Donald started lighting trash cans on fire when he was about 7 or 8 years old. That's how he got his nickname, Trash Can Man. And he blows up the town oil tanks. Quote, "There was a whole country ripe for burning under the summer sun," page 297. He seems to have this extreme fascination with fire, and he decides to just start heading west across the country, and he's gonna, burn stuff. 35. Rita and Larry have started kind of a relationship, and Larry feels very responsible for Rita. She has become very clingy and is constantly wanting reassurance that Larry is not going to leave her. She doesn't want to make waves, so when he tells her, eat your breakfast, she does it, and then she throws up, even though she knew that she was going to be sick if she ate, because the smell of all the dead people in the city, it's starting to upset her. It's just stuff like that where she knows better, but she wants to please him, so she goes against what she is feeling to please him, and then it could have been avoided, but it pisses him off because she's kind of like a child. With Rita kind of suffocating him, quote, "He was still impatient with her and just a trifle contemptuous," page 306. So they decide to head out of New York and go to Maine. That is the plan. And Rita is an idiot, and she wears some open-toed sandals to hike out of the city, and it's just not good footwear, for such a task. As they're nearing the Lincoln Tunnel, Larry realizes that her feet are bleeding, and she has not said anything. She's just kept going, hasn't said, "Wait, I need to get some shoes," nothing. And so he's pissed at her because if she gets an infection or something happens or she's unable to walk, there are no doctors anymore. There's very little that you can do about stuff like that. So Larry's enraged. Quote, "If he was going to take her with him, and it was only today he had begun to think how much simpler life would be if he hadn't, he was just going to have to be responsible for her," page 311. So they fight. Rita tells him, "Well, just leave me," she's being very dramatic, and Larry does. He leaves her after a while. He argues with her, "No, I'm not going to leave you." She's like, "Yes, just leave me. I don't want to be with you anymore." And so Larry heads off, and she doesn't follow him. She hides from him, actually. So he goes to the Lincoln Tunnel, and it's dark in there. It's really dark. There are no lights. And he decides he feels bad and he wants to wait and see if Rita will come. Waits and waits by the entrance to the tunnel. Finally, it starts storming, and he realizes he's just got to go without her. He doesn't know where she is. He doesn't have time to scour the city looking for her. It's dark. It's really dark. It makes me think of, I don't know if you've ever been in a cave, but that complete dark. It's just a horrendous thought because he's in the tunnel with all these cars, with all these dead bodies. He's kind of imagining what would happen if one of the bodies came after him, kind of like a Walking Dead situation. And he is on the catwalk, and as he's walking, he keeps running into bodies. He doesn't have a flashlight with him, he just has a lighter, which eventually he ends up dropping it and losing it. And it's just a very, very chilling scene. Him going through the tunnel with all the dead bodies in the complete dark and stumbling on bodies, all of it. It's just, it's scary. Rita has followed him. She has decided to run after him, so she's followed him. He freaks out and he shoots his gun off, and he almost hits her. And they reunite. He feels bad, but he also feels relief that he can now make it up to her and he can be responsible for her again. So they get out of the tunnel together, and Larry says, quote, "I shouted at you because I was upset," he said quietly. He brushed her hair back and kissed one of the scratches over her right eye. "I'm not such a bad guy," he added quietly. Page 322. So there again, we have just this, Larry wants to be a nice guy. He doesn't want to be a bad guy, and that is something that still irks him and still makes him feel bad. Chapter 36. So now Franny and Harold are definitely the only people in Uncut. They are the only people remaining. The last other person has died. So the two of them hatch a plan to go to Stovington because Harold says Stovington and Atlanta have the plague centers and there will be people trying to study this thing, trying to find a cure for it, etc., etc. And Stovington is obviously going to be closer because they're in Maine, so might as well start with that. So that's the plan. Harold ends up painting a little note on the roof of a barn saying that he and Franny have left town. They are leaving on July 2nd, 1990, and he outlines the route that they're going to take. Chapter 37. Stu is going to walk to the ocean. That's his big plan, and then he's going to decide after he gets there what to do. So as he's walking along, a dog comes up to him, an Irish setter, and a man, Glenn Bateman, comes up after the dog and calls him Kojak. So Stu hasn't seen another living person in a while, and neither has this Glenn. And they have lunch together. They talk about Kojak. Stu asks if Kojak was originally Glenn's dog, and he says no, he was, someone from the town's dog. Quote, "I saw him occasionally, but since I didn't know what his name was, I have taken the liberty of rechristening him." Page 340. And I think that's really funny because I do have some dogs in the neighborhood that I don't know their names, and I have names for those dogs. So let me know down below if you guys have named any of your neighborhood dogs. It's probably a weird thing. I don't know if anyone else does that. Stu and Glenn this is a good chapter. They have a really deep conversation about what will happen to society, how society is going to recover from this, what people are going to be like, what to look out for. And Stu says, quote, "It's not really the end, at least I don't think so, just intermission." Page 341, which I think is a very insightful observation, because you might think that this is the end of the world and society, but it is kind of an intermission since not everyone has died. Glenn says, quote, "In the post-flu world, technological knowledge is going to replace gold as the most perfect medium of exchange." Page 345. And I think he's right. I think having the knowledge of how to restructure things, you need people to run the water and run the electricity and do all that stuff. So if you have that knowledge, or be doctors, if you have that information, you are going to be worth a lot to people. And then we find out from Glenn that he has been having nightmares of Randall Flagg. So many of our characters are having dreams of Randall Flagg. He seems to have some sort of a power over people. Chapter 38 is a very interesting chapter. It's kind of an interlude almost. We have a second epidemic which lasts for a couple weeks, and that finishes off whatever people didn't die in the first epidemic and leaves very, very few people after this. Quote, "In a strictly Darwinian sense, it was the final cut, the unkindest cut of all," some might have said. Page 350. These are stories of people who are left behind dying. So there's a little kid whose entire family has died, and he goes wandering around, he falls into a well, he dies. A woman tries to shoot someone, a pistol explodes in her hand, she dies. Another woman whose entire family died, she ends up going to bed with a cigarette and she dies because she burns the house down. Just all these little things. A guy gets bit by a rattlesnake, there's no one to help him, he dies. Another man has been running and running and running just to try and forget his entire family dying, and he ends up having some kind of a heart episode and he dies. A lot of these things would have been fixable, but because of the situation that people are in now, they're not. And it's also interesting that just because the flu is a thing doesn't mean that people aren't going to die in other ways. Chapter 39 We're back with Lloyd. He hasn't eaten in days, and he has started nibbling on Trask's leg. So he has already eaten the rat, he ate a cockroach, he has gone through all of his food, and now he is starting to nibble on Trask's leg, which upsets him greatly. Flag enters the prison, and he calls out asking if anyone is there. And Lloyd at first doesn't want to answer, which is kind of odd because, you are trapped in a prison cell, you're starving to death, and yet something tells you not to respond to this voice. So Flag rescues Lloyd and says that, Lloyd, you're going to be my right-hand man. I have plans for you. We're going to do this thing together. Quote, Lloyd felt terror, but something else as well. A kind of religious ecstasy, a pleasure, the pleasure of being chosen. Page 366. Flag gives Lloyd a key that changes back and forth. It changes between a key and a black stone with a red flaw in it. Lloyd stumbles on the way out because he's so weak, and Flag catches him and, stops him from falling. Quote, Lloyd turned and looked into that grinning face with something more than gratitude. He looked at Flag with something like love. Page 368. So Lloyd is already, under the spell of Flag. He admires him. He's excessively grateful that he was rescued by him. So he's going to be a very loyal right-hand guy. Chapter 40. Nick is in really bad shape. His eye is so messed up. He's just seeing blurry things out of it. He can't even tell what things are. So now he's blind. He's basically blinded in one eye at this point. And his bullet wound, which he neglected to do anything with immediately, has gotten infected. So he has to stumble around and find some penicillin at the doctor's office. He takes that, and he's hoping that that's gonna solve the problem. But the eye has really kind of been taking up all of his brain power and his time. So Nick has a dream about Flag, and in this dream he can hear. In exchange for worship, Flag is going to bestow upon Nick the gift of hearing. And Nick is tempted, but he does not want to worship Flag, so he is cast down into a cornfield. And in this cornfield, we get this just homey sense, this sense of goodness and wholesomeness. And he emerges from the cornfield, and there is a small house, and this is in Polk County, Nebraska. And there's a small house there, and there's a little black lady sitting on the porch playing a guitar, and she is the oldest person in the current world. And her name is Mother Abigail, and she talks with Nick, and they have a nice little talk. And when Nick wakes up, he decides to go to Nebraska. He felt nice things in this dream, and he wants to go to Mother Abigail in Nebraska. Chapter 41. It is the 4th of July. Rita has died in the night. She choked on her own vomit. She's been taking a lot of pills, and she struggled to get out of the sleeping bag, and Larry was dead asleep beside her. He didn't hear anything. He didn't hear her struggling, nothing, and she ended up choking to death on her own vomit. So Larry automatically wonders, quote, how long was I sleeping with her after she died? Page 379. Her death is kind of a relief because now he's just not responsible for her anymore, which he didn't want to be responsible for her in the beginning. He only kind of begrudgingly took that on. And Larry is alone again, which he doesn't love, but he's also kind of freaked out because now that he's alone, anything that happens to him, he's on his own. They were traveling by motorcycle, and he almost hit another car, and he's thinking, well, if I get into a motorcycle accident, I could bleed out, I could be knocked unconscious and just die. It's just you become very aware of things. Larry is freaked out, and so he starts taking things slowly, and he ditches his motorcycle and just starts walking on foot. And he ends up in a town where he is sleeping in the band shell, and in the middle of the night, he's woken up, he hears a noise, and it's a dark, dark night, The moon is out, but there are clouds over it, so he can't see anything. After a while, he hears boot heels walking away from him. So we are pretty sure it's Randall Flagg. We actually don't know. Quote, Larry felt a sudden, mad urge to stand up, letting the sleeping bag slither down around his ankles, to shout, "Come back, whoever you are. I don't care. Come back." But did he really want to issue such a blank check to whoever? Page 385. So it's the thing with Lloyd, where Lloyd didn't want to answer Flagg because there's just something about him and his presence that either you accept it or you don't. And Lloyd did eventually accept it. Larry did not. So we are pretty sure it was Randall Flagg in the dark with those boot heels. That's the clue. Chapter 42. Stu meets Franny and Harold. They are on motorcycles and they are on their way to Stovington still. And Franny is very friendly towards Stu, but Harold is immediately defensive and rude and just combative. He's very hostile. And Stu is kind of wondering, well, I would like to join up with people, but I don't know that these are the right people to join up with. Quote, he hesitated, wondering again if they were right. The girl was. But the boy Shirley was 17 and afflicted with a bad case of the I hate most everybody's. But were there enough people left to pick and choose? Stu thought not. Page 391. So Stu decides, I don't love Harold, but, beggars can't be choosers at this point. And Harold just doesn't absolutely not want Stu tagging along. And Stu tells them that, I came from Stovington and there's nothing there. I was there for a long time. The plague center is gone. It's just gone. There's nothing to be gained by going there. And Franny believes him immediately, but Harold is still, he wants to see for himself. He wants to go there, and he doesn't like his original plan being upset, and he feels very protective over Franny. And by the way, he doesn't know that she's pregnant yet. And, he has an immediate dislike for Stu. He wants to stay in charge, and he wants to just be him and Franny. And then he and Stu have a little heart-to-heart, and we find out that Harold loves Franny, and he knows that she does not love him back. Stu says, quote, I don't want to cut in, I just want to come along. Page 393. And Harold, as soon as he hears that, he feels better, and he's kind of like, do you promise? And Stu is like, yeah, I promise. As soon as they start traveling and Stu gets to know them, he realizes that he really likes Franny and he wants to be with her. So by the end of this chapter, Stu is already falling for Franny, and that's going to be a problem. The whole triangle between Stu and Harold and Franny. So that is the end of book 1. We will start book 2 next week.